driving business to a bank, and a guy has to run a bank. The guy that's the promoter dresses up with the Battle Bank tie and the Battle Bank hat. And then the guy who has to run the bank, who wouldn't ever subject himself to the cornball indignities that I do, gets to appear sober. I want to brag on Frank. I've known Frank for a very long time, back to the original New Orleans investment conferences. And I remember, I guess it was Mercantile Bank or somebody else back then.
Mark Twain.
Mark Twain. I remember Frank explaining to me, and I did business at that time in probably 20 different countries, that a domestic banking customer could maintain bank accounts in foreign currencies. And I remember going back to the two banks I did business with at that time, Bank of America domestically and Hong Kong Shanghai Bank internationally, and said, "Can I do this?" And they said, "Of course not." So I went back to see Frank next year, and I said, "No, you can't." And he said, "Try me." "Yes, I can." "They can't. I can." Fast forward, I think it was 1998, a mutual friend of ours, David Galland, who used to run marketing, in fact, all the operations for Blanchard, good friend of mine worldwide, he and I had done distance learning together. We'd put together something called the Mining Investment College for the Colorado School of Mines. So David was a pioneer in distance learning and stuff like this. He says, "Rick, I want to do a distance bank. You know, I want a bank that's branchless. I want a bank that people, you know, I want to use modern technology, and I want to have a better bank." And I'd known David for a long time. I said, "David, do you know anything about banking?" He said, "Well, that is an issue." No, I know a lot about marketing. I said, "Listen, I know this guy, and I think you'd like him." And many people don't know this, but the result of that meeting and spreadsheets of butcher paper on my living room floor was Everbank, which was a wonderful set of circumstances. Truly the idea that an idea about how you could serve a market better could turn into a $28 billion institution. Admittedly, Frank worked 14 years to be an overnight success. But it was really exciting to watch. Frank and them sold the bank to TIAA, CREF. And by the way, I think that TIAA does a good job for their customers. They bought the bank, they bought the platform. If you happen to be a retired teacher, you might want to stay there. I don't think I have many retired teachers in this room. If you want the range of services that TIAA used to cover, then perhaps you need to think about Battle Bank, and perhaps you need to sign up. So I want to get deeper into this, Frank. One thing that occurs to me, and I'm not going to name the banks, but I do business with 5 banks right now. And 2 of them I have consistently maintained, I'm not going to disclose the number, but let's just say 7-figure balances. And I would describe my relationship with these banks right now as sullen, but not yet mutinous. Now, if I had a customer that had a consistent 7-figure balance with me, I might not be able to shine his or her shoes, but I guarantee you that they wouldn't be sullen. 2 experiences that I'd like to relate to you before I discuss with Frank. One is the aforementioned branch visit. I visited my big box bank, and I'm not going to disclose their name. And I went in, I had a liquidity event, and I wanted to discuss deposit products. And the very kind woman who runs that branch, because they had so many products and because she couldn't possibly understand them, she points me to a white service phone, I guess to call to India or something like that. What benefit did I get from that branch, other than the fact that occasionally they have cookies in the lobby and this is a very nice woman? None. I went in a couple weeks later, and this is unbelievable. This is one of the biggest banks in the world. And I wanted to wire U.S. dollars from my account in the United States to a foreign recipient in U.S. dollars to their correspondent bank in New York City. I wanted to wire my U.S. money, probably from New York, in U.S. dollars to a U.S. dollar recipient in New York. We tried for 3 hours, and they couldn't do it. I'm not trying to say they didn't try, but at the end of the day, I kind of don't care how hard they tried. It was my money. It's not like I was trying to wire kwacha or some unpronounceable currency. It was U.S. dollars from the U.S. to the U.S., and they couldn't do it. I have another bank who I won't name, but they describe themselves as a local bank around the world. I've done business with them around the world. I had an account with them in Chile, an account with them in Hong Kong, an account with them in New Zealand, an account with them in Canada, an account with them in the United States. Do you think that this bank that advertises itself as my local bank around the world could allow me to open up an Australian dollar account or a US dollar account or a Canadian dollar account in the US? Couldn't do it. This is astonishing. I mean, this is absolutely astonishing. So when Frank got in touch with me 3 years ago and said, you know, Rick, there's a huge hole in the market. I'm thinking at the time, you know what, I want to retire. Life is full of opportunities. I've availed myself of a bunch of them. Do I want another opportunity? My first answer was no. And then 24 hours later, I thought, we have to do this. I mean, we have to do this. There's literally billions of dollars worth of business to do. Do I think that we can compete with Bank of America? No. Can Bank of America compete with us? No. They can't do it. Banking really is about serving your community. And you all here are our community. You're libertarian, you're gold and silver oriented, you're international oriented. You have this quaint sense, really, that your money is your money. And if you're interested in having a relationship with a bank that believes that your money is your money, a bank that believes if you want to save in some currency outside the U.S. dollar that you ought to be able to do it, a bank that believes that your IRA is your IRA, we want your business. So, Frank, I want to start with this. You aren't quite as old as me, but you're pushing the envelope.
Inches away.
Yeah, you're pushing the envelope, and you've had a couple of pretty good passes in your life. Why aren't you just hiking in the Rockies and playing with your grandchildren? What on earth brought you back?
Well, I think a lot of the things and we sort of both say we're enjoying retirement by starting a new bank, and that's exactly what we're doing. It's absolutely critical to implement Battle Bank for a lot of the reasons I discussed a few minutes ago. Whether you have a sullen relationship with your bank or an okay relationship with your bank, they're not giving you value, they're not giving you the opportunity to do all these different things around the world. And importantly, every time I walk into some other bank, which is infrequent, the client service just doesn't make it. And I love this community that we serve. I love to chat with everybody. And there's one of the great things about being a banker is people tell you stories. I crawled through the barbed wire of Eastern Europe and came and started this wonderful company. Or just I took over dad's business or mom's business. It's not, all of these different things are fun. And I just think it's important to reestablish the opportunity to have access to the global markets, to be able to have fair rates and wonderful client service. There's so many different businesses out there that have declined over the last 30, 40 years. Just, if parents were both physicians, it's a different market these days. If anybody out there is a doctor, house calls, even think about that. I mean, we had house calls when I was a kid. The pediatrician would stop by the house and say, how you doing? That looks like, whatever dread disease we were having that week. Not happening anymore. Now it's very corporate. If you're lucky, even here in the United States, to get an appointment with your physician inside of 3 weeks or 6 months, or my GP is scheduling out 15 months. If you sort of roll that through, you don't get an annual physical, right? Same sort of thing with banking. And I just think it's absolutely critical to come back to be able to provide an opportunity to our community to get great service, fair rates, wonderful client service, and an opportunity to do things globally. And as we sort of started putting it together, it's 20 years later, there's a lot of what we did before in there, but it's much more modern now, being able to do that with really beautiful online services, but backed up by folks that are wonderful at client service. You know, it's interesting, client service, you know, Rick said, well, we're going to go talk to India about the products at his local bank, international bank. Our folks, typically, you know, former branch manager, somebody who's been in the branch for a long time, has done that transaction 10,000 times that you're asking about. They're not...
Frank, you got to speak up. Some people are trying to hear you.
Oh, sorry. Am I not getting it here? You know, you're not, you're talking to somebody who knows what they're doing, who knows and has done that transaction a million times, and is willing to slowly, if necessary, walk you through that. And if they don't know the answer, they'll say, I don't know. I'll get back to you. I think a lot of people these days in customer service just give an answer off the top of their head. You know, our folks know what they're doing, understand that you really want to get it done right and quickly. So all these different things sort of come together to, you know, take me out of the back country, or at least somewhat out of the back country. Still get out there. If you follow our LinkedIn, you'll see we may get back there from time to time. But you know, this is exciting to me. It's exciting to do this again, and I think it's important to do it again. It's really providing this community with something you really need.
You know, this marks me as a strange person, but one of the things I really like to do in my spare time is look at balance sheets and income statements from companies. And I particularly enjoy, for some odd reason, I'm not a masochist, but I enjoy intellectually pawing through the balance sheet and income statements of big financial services companies. I mean, I actually like this. And one of the things that began to strike me, well, I know when it happened. When I was looking for a clearing firm for Global Resource Investments, the firm that would handle my customer accounts, I thought it was important to have a solvent counterparty. And so I started pawing through the income statements and the balance sheets of the various financial supermarkets that did custodial clearing. You know, Fidelity, Schwab, Merrill Lynch, all those people. And I discovered, to my horror, that despite the fact that I did balance sheets and income statements both for a living and for sport, that when I looked at the financial service companies' balance sheets and income statements, I could not understand them. So what chance does a mortal have if I can't do it? Fast forward, and I won't say the institution, but the treasurer from a major multinational financial institution became a customer of mine at Sprott. And he was a good customer. Before he gave me any money, he subjected me to about 4 hours of due diligence. And it was really good due diligence. And afterwards I said, listen, you just had 4 hours with me. Can I have 10 or 15 minutes with you? He said, sure. And I said, you know, I just got done with your balance sheet and your income statement and your proxy. And I got to be honest with you, I don't understand your balance sheet. And he looked at me and smiled. And he said, that means I did my job. And that's why I'm your customer. He's the treasurer. He said, our balance sheet doesn't make any sense to me at all. And that's why I'm interested in gold. What I want to hear from Frank, and by the way, I'm on the board, is that I, as an involved mortal, can always understand the Battle Bank balance sheet. When I look at these big banks, and I'm not trying to say that it's going to go wrong, but when I look at a big bank with, say, $300 billion in equity, it's a big number, but I see that number securing $50 trillion in nominal derivatives liability. For some reason, I think I don't know enough about that institution to either be their shareholder or have money in them. When I look at two, at the failure of Silicon Valley Bank and the other banks, and you see that the average duration of their liabilities, their deposits, is 2 weeks or 3 weeks, and the average duration of their assets is 6 years, meaning that in a period of rising interest rates, their cost of capital triples while their return on capital employed declines. There's no part of that makes me happy. I want you to tell people, me in particular, a 9.9% shareholder in your bank, that I'm not going to have trouble understanding your balance sheet and your income statement.
Well, Rick, I don't think you're going to have trouble understanding our balance sheet. We'll be heavily capitalized. As I said, I've been running bond portfolios for banks back into the 1980s. And we see what Silicon and some of the others appear to have done, the borrow short, lend long game. And it's probably part of the public markets. They're looking for 2 pennies a share more that quarter, so gee, let's stretch it out, get a little more yield. We're not driven that way. We've sort of refused to follow that process. And I think one of our slides at this conference last year was that J.P. Morgan Chase had added $67 trillion in derivatives in the previous quarter. So it was on top of what they already had. And again, understand derivatives trading, understand matchbooks, understand being a trader. But that same sort of feeling always overtakes me, which is it just takes a little bit of a hiccup on one section before the whole house comes down. A lot of people have been talking about, since 2008, economist by the name of Hy Minsky. And Chuck and I knew Hy back in the 1980s and 1990s. We used to take him to lunch. He was part of our asset liability committee. And he's, of course, been quoted a lot famously as the Minsky moment. Things go along just fine until they don't. And I sort of always talk about that in terms of you're at a dinner party with, 5 or 6 other couples, and nobody leaves and nobody leaves and nobody leaves until one couple leaves, and then everybody's gone in 10 seconds. This is the Minsky moment. This is what happened in 2008, 2009, and we need to build our balance sheet. We will build our balance sheet so that Minsky moment doesn't impact us. Highly capitalized, balanced balance sheet, rational businesses where short is short and long is long. These are fairly simple principles that people stray from, just stretching for yield, stretching for that extra 2 cents a share, and you can't do that. And of course, Rick's had the opportunity to see our proposed balance sheets, our proposed income statements, and I'm sure he's gone through every single line, which we do very frequently ourselves. And it's easy to understand. We take in deposits on this side, we sell them as loans on the other side or put them into short-term securities, and it works. And I don't have to have a massive spread to keep the bank running, make some money. We just need to have some income. And as long as you're not stretching, you're not reaching, you're not over-committing to try to achieve that, I think that's how you run a business for the long term. Again, we did that at Everbank. We plan to do it at Battle Bank. We did it at Mark Twain Banks 40 years ago. And it's important to keep your eye on the ball, to make it easy to understand. And I was reading some 10Qs the other day myself. I guess does that make us sort of wonky boys together? And it was probably about page 250 when I finally got the answer I wanted, even though it was not clear to me exactly what they were saying. It should be easy to read. Our footnotes should be pretty short unless the auditors just add verbiage to it. But we've even committed to public audits before launch. Our 2022 audit's already out there. We are focused on full disclosure, transparency, doing things right, holding capital, some of the things that traditional banks may have done, and it just seems to have gone from the market.
How many Canadians in the room? Good number of Canadians. Frank, 2 questions. I'll give them both to you till you answer it. Will you do Canadian dollar money market funds, and will you do Canadian dollar CDs?
Yes, and yes.
Of more interest, Well, maybe not of more interest, because that's the condition precedent. Let's say, just suppose, that the Prime Minister of Canada took exception to contributions made by Canadians to political opposition, let's say truck drivers. I'm talking hypothetically here.
Well, it's good
right?
to think. It's good to have theoretical things.
And let's say that he made it illegal, hypothetically. Wouldn't do this, of course.
No.
Kind French-Canadian guy, why would he do this? And let's say that those Canadians had their deposit in Canadian dollars with you in the United States, and Mr. Trudeau threatened you with sanction in Canadian courts. Mm-hmm. Which finger would you show him?
Something in the middle. I don't know. I'm kind of a middle-of-the-road kind of guy.
Just saying. Okay? Just saying.
We'll meet you in Washington, D.C. in federal court.
Yeah.
I don't think that's going to happen. Yeah, exactly.
I don't think, I can tell you what my response as a director would be.
I'm sure the board will support us in this.
Yes.
Just guessing.
Yeah. Sir, you can seize every deposit we have in Whitehorse, every single deposit we have in Whitehorse. Moving beyond that, it's odd, I think, that that bank, which purports to be my local bank around the world, first of all, despite that sophistication, can't open foreign currency accounts in the U.S., and also charges me 200 basis points to transfer my Chilean pesos into U.S. dollars, and then 200 basis points again if I want to turn them into Hong Kong dollars. Mm-hmm. Let's say, hypothetically, that I had a Hong Kong. Let's say that I was not Rick Rule now. I'm a first-generation Chinese businessman, and I have a business in Hong Kong and a business in the U.S.
Yep. And
I have a money market account and perhaps a CD in Hong Kong dollars and U.S. dollars. And I want to change Hong Kong dollars from my one account into U.S. dollars.
0.75%?
Not 200 basis points.
No.
Right.
And a lot of the banks, as I think you guys have probably all run into, that actually turns into 500 to 1,000 basis points.
Right.
It's not necessarily disclosed. They say, we're going to charge you a $25 fee or no fee, and they're just going to mark it up. I mean, it's not the kiosk at the airport, which is uniformly 10 to 15%, but it's still a markup, and it's fascinating to us that that's not something that more people talk about.
One of the things that's always scared me as a depositor, frankly, and as I get older, I'm more concerned about depositing, than I am borrowing, because I don't borrow much anymore. But I look at these great big financial supermarket banks, and it would seem to me that they attempt to lend to 1,000 different classifications of customers. Mm-hmm. And I wonder how it is that those big banks can understand 1,000 different businesses or millions of businesses. I want you to address the things that Battle Bank won't do. As an example, your branch is going to be in somebody's computer or on their phone. Mm-hmm. And a customer who isn't competent to have that is probably a customer you don't want, to be honest.
Right.
And there are probably going to be a whole bunch of lending categories that a bank our size isn't going to be able to address.
Right.
So I want you to talk about that, too, because I think that the business a bank decides not to do ultimately becomes more important than the business they do, both in terms of the shareholders, the borrowers, and the depositors. So let's talk about what we're not going to do.
I mean, the easy answer is we're not chasing the Fortune 500 big deal, the old First National Bank of Chicago type of white shoe client. It's great to provide a facility to IBM, I suppose. Theoretically a good credit, we'll see. But it's just not stuff we do. And I think one of the best ways to put it is, the big banks can't compete with us, and we can't compete with them. We're focused on being in markets where we're going to be able to dominate them, but we're underserved. We have the sophistication on board in Jeremy and his team to do really theoretically any type of loan, but we're not chasing deals. And we're going to focus on markets that are either too small or abandoned by some of the larger players, and get into those markets and serve them well. We're not chasing deals is the key. And that can take in, with Chase or somebody like that with 250,000 to 500,000 employees, maybe you can have a specialty in some oddball lending community. We're not doing that. We're focused. We're focused on serving the community here. We're focused on serving the business that you may bring as an independent operator. And for example, we were a huge mortgage player at Everbank, and we'll do mortgages if we talk to our clients, but this is a terrible time to be in the mortgage business. People are being laid off. Not many going out the door, and maybe we get into that down the road. But right now is a good example of something we are not doing, because it's not something that serves the community, and it's also not something that gives us. It takes too much of our resources to focus on. Anything else that comes immediately to mind? Anything with a 100-yard dash?
Well, my own feeling is simply that you and I have grown up servicing the same community. Who is in this room?
Right.
Really. My belief is that you need to service a customer that's sophisticated and worth serving, a customer that can open and turn on a computer or a phone. Mm-hmm. My belief is that the branch doesn't serve these customers, and there's 120 basis points of non-interest expense that the branch gets that the customer doesn't get.
Yes.
My belief, too, is that this audience believes that their IRA is their IRA, and within the law they ought to be able to invest it the way they want to, that they ought to invest in any currency that is legal. And for me, the biggest opportunity I've seen in a very long time in retail banking is the ability to lend investors money secured by the most liquid and finest collateral on the planet, which is bullion.
Yes.
Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you all, and I want to thank Frank for saving me from retirement. It turns out that my brain either needs to be stimulated or sedated, and working is much healthier than drinking. So, Frank, ladies and gentlemen, thank you.